Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grid Live Post Race. Joe Samaniego here, along with Kobe Lambis from the Podium Finish. Be sure to participate in the chat room. We'd love to hear from you. Read your questions, comments of all the racing going on this weekend. And of course, as we all know, about 20 minutes ago, the NASCAR race at Texas has been postponed, scheduled to resume tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific on NBC SN. But first, we'll start off the night with the IndyCar recap.
Traditionally, the first race of the season, not now the season finale due to the pandemic in this crazy 2020. Early on in the race, we didn't have a full course caution, but had as Calvin Fitz liked to say, a little argy bargy here and there, and Joe, this year's been really crazy. St. Pete typically opens up the season, but this year it closes the season. And with a lot on the line, the championship between Scott Dixon, Josef Newgarden, and drivers trying to prove themselves one final time heading into the off season, especially if they're not going to be returning to their current seat. Do you think that this changed the character of this race?
It did change the character of this race. Traditionally, with this race, start of the season, so everyone's trying out their new cars, new setups, new chemistry between the crew chiefs and everything. This year was a lot more different because now we have a championship on the line. Scott Dixon, Josef Newgarden, everybody, of course, they've been working together with their teams all season long. And then I feel, especially in the race where I was expecting an early caution, we didn't get that. And most likely because, okay, everyone, we've been doing this already the entire season. Let's try to get the first few laps in, have a good, clean race to end the season on the high note. But as we're going to get into, this was definitely one of the more bizarre races of the entire season for the NTT IndyCar series.
Yeah, definitely, really a bizarre race, and I do think the fact that St. Pete was a season finale, with a lot of things on the line, I do think that definitely contributed to a much wilder race than we expected because we had Josef Newgarden trying to steal the championship from Scott Dixon, and Scott Dixon with the pressure on him to maintain and not get caught, not hit the wall or get caught up in someone else's mess, and then drivers who don't know where they're going to be racing next season. So there was definitely a lot of pressure throughout the field. And on lap 36, pole sitter Will Power hit the outside wall and ended up retiring from the race. Definitely hasn't been the year that Will Power has hoped for, but he was hopeful to have a good race, and to move up in the championship standings. But it just wasn't meant to be today for him. But just some Newgarden's had a decent year, the winner of today's race, and overall, it's been a rather quiet year for Team Penske as a whole. How would you rate Team Penske this season, especially drivers like Will Power and Simon Pagenaud, who haven't seen as much success as Josef Newgarden this year?
For Team Penske, this is definitely a year to look over, see where did we miss so many opportunities to get wins. We know Will Power seemed to have a lot of bad luck, especially pit road. There was a lot of pit road mistakes that cost him potential wins. Simon Pagenaud just didn't seem to have the car, didn't seem to be a big threat as in years past, and really Josef Newgarden carried that. This is the opportunity, the offseason, to look at, review everything we've done, try to build for next year. And of course, next year we're going to have another vehicle out there with Scott McLaughlin joining Penske. Of course, today was his debut. So definitely, that's what I would be doing if I was in Team Penske, reviewing everything, where can we improve, and just try to make improvements for next year.
Yeah, I'm sure Roger Penske, Tim Cindric, they're going to go to the drawing board and make sure they can have a much better season in 2021 than they had this year. Yeah, and it's certainly they're gonna be adding the extra car with Scott McLaughlin next season. So going to be Newgarden, Power, Pagenaud, and McLaughlin. And speaking of Scott McLaughlin, although he ended up crashing out of his debut race, he seemed very upbeat afterwards, and he's really looking forward to making the full-time switch to IndyCar. And later on in the race, Santino Ferrucci made hard contact with the wall on the restart, and he was all right. And then just mentioned Scott McLaughlin, Renus VK made contact on the restart for and then another caution there. And tire temperatures was an issue for a lot of the drivers. And then we went a while without a caution, and then all of a sudden, Alexander Rossi crashed in the same spot as Will Power. And Alexander Rossi is going to be returning to Andretti next year. In 2020 wasn't kind to him at all. Rossi ends up going winless in 2020. How do you think Rossi Andretti and his team are going to process the off season?
Definitely, the off season has to be a time to okay. We got to put 2020 behind us. I don't really like to use the term "it's 2020." That's just the way 2020 went. For Rossi's case, that was sort of the way it went, and it all went wrong from the beginning. Texas, they had issues before the race started. They just never really seemed to get that momentum going to have race after race where they were contending for wins. To see him just spin out, crash out, it's not like he went out there and just did something where, something like a rookie mistake or just didn't perform well. He was leading, could have easily won. Yes, he got into marbles, lost control, got spun out, but that's no reason to hold your head down for the entire offseason. The offseason, clear your head. Just say that is 2020. We're putting that behind us. 2021, we're going to come back stronger. We're going to be focused on winning, and we're going to try to take this championship and bring it home to Andretti Autosport. That's the attitude Rossi's going to have, and I think all team Andretti Autosports as well.
Yeah, that's the right attitude to have, and that's the only attitude to have. If you want to put this dreadful year behind, it did seem like as the season went on, Alexander Rossi started getting a lot better, and his team started clicking. But but it just wasn't there this year, and I'm sure a lot of people are shocked at the fact that Alexander Rossi didn't win a single IndyCar race this year because I really expected him to contend for the championship. While if you remember back at Texas at the season opener this year. Alexander Rossi had a bad start to the season and he just never recovered. Yeah, it was just he just went downhill from there. And Paul Tracy referred to this crazy race that we saw today as he compared it to Tiger King after James Hinchcliffe spun out under caution. And then it was really crazy because after Hinchcliffe spun out, he tried to get back going in the right direction and ended up crashing into Jack Harvey. And and to make matters really crazier, that's when it started to rain on the front stretch, and we got another yellow. We went from a race of 35 caution-free laps to absolute mayhem. Oh, and Joseph Newgarden took the lead and went on to win the race, but ultimately Scott Dixon finished third and went on to claim his sixth IndyCar championship. What are your thoughts on Scott Dixon being a six-time IndyCar champion?
Scott Dixon, definitely congratulations, Scott Dixon, and that Target. I mean, not Target. PNC Bank Ganassi Racing team. Big effort to get the championship. We saw how he started the season really strong, win after win after win. But after Indianapolis 500, it just seemed like the momentum was gone. I mean, just struggling. Newgarden had been gaining points on him throughout the second half of the season after the Indianapolis 500. And today, really, I feel like we were watching a little bit of the Scott Dixon from earlier this year. Started 12th, worked his way up to essentially third place. I know there was some incidents that occurred here and there, the restarts, Colton Herta crashing out. But definitely, it was the cool, calm Scott Dixon that we're used to seeing to go out there, do what he needs to do, and get a championship. And definitely, he is one of the all-time greats when it comes to IndyCar as well.
Yeah, definitely. Scott Dixon is without a doubt one of the all-time greats in IndyCar, and I do think that Scott Dixon doesn't get enough credit on the international motorsport stage as well. I think Scott Dixon at the end of the day is also going to be one of the top motorsports drivers that we've seen, during this generation of his time. It's been amazing to see what he's been able to accomplish in IndyCar, and yes, six-time champion. Not a lot of drivers can say that they won six championships in IndyCar or any other series of motorsports. But but moving forward, it's going to be interesting to see if Scott Dixon can claim a seventh or even an eighth IndyCar championship because it seems like he might have a few more years left in his career, and I'm sure their Chip Ganassi race is going to be able to look at their entire program as a whole throughout the offseason. Look at all the great things that happen with Scott Dixon's team, see where they can get even stronger next year, and I don't know if yeah, I think the jury's still out on if Marcus Ericsson's going to return next year, and then they're going to be adding that 48 car. Carvana's going to be sponsoring Jimmy Johnson's number 48 Honda next year. Yeah, so they're going to be adding an extra car to the stable. I also need to watch out what's going to happen with the 10 cars since it seems like Felix Rosenqvist is going to be moving over to Arrow McLaren SP to replace Oliver Askew.
Yeah, a lot happening in the IndyCar series. definitely is going to be really exciting to see, and we're going to have a little bit more IndyCar coverage in the program. One of the big things, of course, besides IndyCar today, we also had Formula One, the Portuguese Grand Prix. Of course, the first time since 1996, Formula One is holding a race in the country of Portugal. And before we start of the race weekend in Portugal, there was some controversy earlier when it was announced that Vitaly Petrov was going to be a steward for the weekend, especially for comments he had made about Black Lives Matter and the LGBTQA community. Unfortunately, that all went away. It was just a grim reminder that we had a reality check of what's really important in life. Tragic news, of course, came out that his father was shot and he was unable to do his duties. This is just really a grim reminder that while we all may have different opinions, experiences in life, and perception, we are all human. We all have families we all care about, and taking someone's life is never acceptable. And we're definitely thinking of Petrov, his family throughout this tragic time for them. Of course, Lewis Hamilton, he went out today. He was just unstoppable. Essentially, big thing for him was try to get a win, and of course that will break their tie with Michael Schumacher. We come out to the opening laps though, and it looked like it may not happen when Valtteri Bottas got around Lewis Hamilton, and then Carlos Sainz not only got around Lewis Hamilton, but also Valtteri Bottas to lead the Portugal Grand Prix. Really exciting. Of course, one of the big reasons why it was a much cooler day, dark clouds. If you were on soft tires, you seem to have a quick start. The medium tires had a little bit of trouble heating up. However, once the tire temperatures did come up, both Mercedes got around Carlos Sainz. Lewis Hamilton got around Valtteri Bottas, and it was game over at that point. Essentially lapped everybody except the top four, won the race by over 25 seconds. We said it was game over yesterday on Grid Live pre-race. How much work does everyone have trying to catch up to Lewis Hamilton?
Oh, I still think the same thing, Joe. It's still game over. I don't really see anybody being a threat for to the championship to Lewis Hamilton in 2020, but maybe 2021 when we get to Melbourne, Australia for the season opener. Assuming that we are going to have a season opener in Australia, I understand that the lockdown restrictions are a lot stricter than other countries in the world. But yeah, but whenever the 2021 season starts, that's when I think everybody will have a chance to catch Lewis Hamilton, because this season I think that he's performing so well and he's just too far gone right now.
Too far gone. Today really demonstrated his tire management. Both Mercedes went really long on the tires, and then they went from the mediums to the hards, which a lot of folks anticipate there'll be some trouble, but those hard tires definitely performed better than the soft tires did today in the race. Overall, in the race, we saw plenty of passing. Of course, the cold condition created a first few chaotic laps in the start of the race. Many, especially on social media, were really raving on the track. We heard the crowd at the track; they were really into it. Big cheers for Lewis Hamilton when he won to get his 92nd win. Simply, Lewis, too much for everyone. 92 wins. How historic! 92 wins, breaking Michael Schumacher's records. Kobe, what are your thoughts on this historic day?
It just proves what many people already know. Lewis Hamilton will go down as history as one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time. There's not really much more I can say there. It's just yeah. People try to be like, oh, those wins don't really mean anything, because for most of them, he's always been in the best car. But I don't really think that's really a valid argument in my opinion. 92 wins, still 92 wins. We've seen drivers get in the best cars and not do anything with it. I do think that although you might be in the best car, but if you put a driver who's not as talented like that in the best car, they're not going to do well with it. And if you put a driver like Lewis Hamilton, best driver out there in the best car, you get 92 wins.
You bring up a really good point. The best car. We've seen Michael Schumacher win with the best car in Ferrari. We've seen Senna win when McLaren had the best car. Williams, Mansell was getting wins with the best car. A lot of times the car is a big factor, but you still need to have the talent, because a lot of times we are seeing where the teammate is not doing that great. In fact, Valtteri Bottas finished 25 seconds behind Lewis Hamilton today. Speaking about teammates as well, Ferrari, Charles Leclerc, fourth place. I know yesterday you said the chances of Ferrari on the podium slim, no podium again. Of course, one of the big things as well, Red Bull. Max Verstappen had a very eventful race. First lap made contact with it's not Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez. That's essentially put Sergio Perez way in the back. Max Verstappen was able to keep going, come third place, but his teammate, Alex Albon, finished outside the points and was even lapped, including lapped and passed by his teammate Max Verstappen. Now, Mercedes is pulling away with the constructors, and it could essentially wrap it up shortly. Knowing that you have always the two Mercedes finishing in the top 10, but too often we're having just one Red Bull in the top 10 scoring points. Is it safe to assume that Albon will not be in the Red Bull next year?
Knowing how Red Bull is, I hate to say this for Alex Albon, but I think that his time driven for Red Bull Racing is going to be numbered. I don't know if that's going to be like what happened with Pierre Gasly, where they're going to demote Albon to AlphaTauri, or he's just going to have to try to find another Formula One rider, or he's going to be out of Formula One altogether. But I think if Albon loses his seat, he's going to be in trouble because the Red Bull and Honda, they really like the upcoming F2 driver Yuki Tsunoda, and Honda would really love to have a Japanese driver in Formula One. So it looks like Danny Kvyat could be out of Formula One at the end of the year, and that seat could go to Yuki Tsunoda, who's going to get the test with the team at the end of the year at Abu Dhabi. Yeah, so right now for Alex Albon, things are not looking good for him to stay at Red Bull and or even Formula One.
The way he's running, I know a lot of people, of course, are talking and comparing him to Pierre Gasly last season. It's just one of those things where that car, being the number two driver, is such a disadvantage. It would be unfortunate to see Alex Albon out of a ride and out of F1 in general, just falling victim to being the number two driver at the Red Bull team. It's just unfortunately the way the sport is. Now, speaking about a driver that's also looking for a ride as well next year, Sergio Perez. He started up front, of course, as I mentioned, first lap contact with Max Verstappen, fell all the way to the back, essentially to ninth place, comes up to fifth, but then a late stop on soft tires, which didn't work today at all. He got passed around, still came in the top 10. Lance Stroll, though, he was coming up towards the front, but then he had a penalty for track limits and contact with Lando Norris, another penalty, then had to retire due to mechanical issues. Of course, Sebastian Vettel just barely got into the points, 10th place finish. For Vettel, seeing how fast his new team is, since Racing Point, which will be Aston Martin, is going to have very similar cars, can he go in 2021 expecting to be a championship contender or at least going for wins compared to now?
Well, I don't know if Racing Point will be ready to be a championship contender in 2021. You know, so it's not a lot's going to change from this year and the next year with this car. But 2022 could be a whole different ball game. We could see the rebranded Aston Martin team contend, and in my opinion, I think that we could potentially see this team, Racing Point Aston Martin Racing F1. We could see them contending for wins or even championship in 2022. But I think if you see Mercedes have an off day next year, then maybe Sebastian Vettel could be able to steal a win. But I do think that although his final season with Ferrari has been an absolute disaster, I think he can smile inside seeing how well Racing Point is performing right now.
Yeah, Racing Point, they're looking really good. Of course, bad luck for Sergio Perez. Lance Stroll, just one of those chaotic races where it just seemed a lot was not going his way. Now, when it comes to the grid ranking, Lewis Hamilton, he won from the pole, so he is still in the hunt for the grid ranking world championship. Essentially, 3 wins and 2 second places. As long with those second place finishes, he had started third or further back to get up to second. If under that scenario, he could win the grid ranking world championship, or of course, win the remaining races left. The races we do have left, Turkey, 2 races of Bahrain, including the almost oval, and Abu Dhabi, tracks he has done well at in the past. It'll be really close to see what happens with the grid ranking. We encourage everyone to follow the grid ranking on Twitter at grid ranking. Now, definitely was going to be one of those things where I'm really excited, but none of the big things now. talk a little bit about NASCAR and particularly the Xfinity and trucks at Texas.
Yeah, I wanted to start this NASCAR discussion with some of the major storylines coming out of the Xfinity and Truck Series races at Texas. But starting with the Xfinity, there was an incident involving not one, not two, but three playoff contenders. It was Ross Chastain, Justin Allgaier, and Brandon Jones. Allgaier blamed Chastain for the incident and called him Two-Face. Chastain took responsibility and seemed pretty dejected, and Brandon Jones has had nowhere to go. In the end, Chastain ended up finishing 16th, and then Brandon Jones and Justin Allgaier finished 25th and 26th. And in this incident on track left Justin Allgaier only 8 points above the cut line. Brandon Jones 4 points below, and Ross Chastain a little more uncomfortable situation, 15 points out. How nervous should these drivers be heading into Martinsville? I mean, imagine if this crash never happened on the backstretch. They'd likely be in a much better position.
Being in a much better position, and with Martinsville being a short track, it's not as big as a wild card as Talladega. Talladega, of course, everyone there has a really good shot of winning. Just avoid the big one. With Martinsville, yes, there's a bigger pool of drivers that are eligible to win. It's a short track, aerodynamics. It's not going to be a big thing. The horsepower, not too much of a factor, but the beating and banging. And if you get pushed at the wrong moment, we've seen how a driver could go in the corner leading and then just get pushed out and they lose 5, 10 positions once they get pushed out of the way. For them, they're going to be really nervous about who's racing behind them, especially if it's another playoff driver who's in front of them. Will they use the bumper? It's going to be a really physical race. And compared to being in a better spot, knowing just get some good finishes, they're going to be in the thick of a battle for the championship hopes.
Yeah, Marsville is always a physical race. The short track up there in Virginia, about 45 minutes from my house here in Reidsville, North Carolina. Yeah, it's gonna be really crazy next week. And I think out of those three drivers, this is really gonna hurt Ross Chastain the most because Chastain he set the fastest lap of the entire race. Had the absolutely best car. Colleague racing, they were destined to win that race and secured our spot in the championship four at Phoenix. And now look at Ross Chastain after that incident, 15 points out now. Yes, he can. Yes, with stage racing, he can still point his way in to the championship four, but winning is absolutely everything. And I feel like if he had won that race, all of his worries heading into Marsville would be completely non-existent. And the highlight of the race was a thrilling finish. After Chastain and other contenders took themselves out of contention, Noah Gragson seemed destined to advance to the championship four. The win was his, and you could see the checker flag in the air all of a sudden. Harrison Burton sweeps underneath Noah Gragson and stole the win at the very last minute coming out of turn four when Gragson left the bottom open and Burton took advantage of the situation to win the race at Texas. And if Gragson had held on for the victory, he would be racing for a championship in a couple of weeks. Now, because of his mistake in turn four, the very last turn on the final lap, he's 24 points out with one race to go until the championship race. Is this the definition of an absolute heartbreaker? And does it truly emphasize the importance of winning in this particular playoff format?
Yes, winning in this playoff format is so critical. Win it in the regular season as well. I mean, we're seeing how the playoff points, the stage points are such an important deal. I mean, had he held on, blocked the bottom, tried to force Burton to go up high, we'd be probably talking about him being in the championship race, as you had mentioned. 24 points out of the championship. That's 24 positions, essentially. This just makes it where instead of going to Martinsville, knowing that I'm locked into championship, just go out there, try to get a win, have a good time. It's a lot of stress. It's going to be, I need to run up front. And if I'm also running up front, I need my rivals to have some bad luck so that I'm at least not only catching them and passing them, but I'm going to get myself in the championship because if he was to win, of course, that'll get him in. But if he was to get second, third, or fourth, if those rivals are just right there behind him, he's still going to be on the outside. And that's just a lot of pressure entering a short track.
Yes, and if Noah Gragson is unable to get into the championship four after next weekend's race at Martinsville, I feel like he's really going to be hard on himself, and he's gonna be kicking himself because he was literally just one corner away from advancing to Phoenix, and then left that little lane open for Harrison Burton to get underneath him and still to win, you know, like right out of nowhere. That was I went on the last lap when I was watching it. I was like, Noah Gregson is going to Phoenix, and then when I saw Harrison Burton get under him, I'm like, oh my goodness, no way. Yeah. Overall, it was a great race yesterday. Great race yesterday. Exciting finish. Everybody thought Noah Gregson had it in the bag, but this just shows that it's not over until it's over. And while the Xfinity Series had exciting on track action, there were some hot tempers in the NASCAR Truck Series race earlier this afternoon, and one driver was the center of attention. Ben Rhodes from ThorSport Racing had quite an eventful day. He made contact with Todd Gilliland, sending the number 38 hard into the wall. Then he and Christian Eckes were battling hard. Rhodes ended up hooking Eckes on the front stretch, ending the 18th day, and Eckes was livid and gave Rhodes the willpower double Texas salute. After that, Rhodes was involved in another on track incident. Rhodes said Chandler Smith, Eckes' teammate at KBM, retaliated against him, which ended up in a damaged truck for driver Josh Balicki and his car owner, Josh Rayone. Balicki sent out a tweet after the race saying that Rhodes has way more to lose at Martinsville than him. And after the race, Alan Cavana of Fox Sports posted a photo of Christian Eckes standing at Ben Rhodes' hauler waiting for the driver who took him out of the race. And later on, Cavana posted a video, it was a short video, fall on a confrontation between the two drivers in which NASCAR security had to step in. And all Ben Rhodes has to do is win at Martinsville, and he's in the championship four. Was it a really bad idea for him to make so many enemies this late in the game, especially in this race?
Yes. I mean, this is just one of those things. It reminds me so much of what happened with Joey Logano, Matt Kenseth. Logano had swept that round. And of course, spun out Matt Kenseth at Kansas. Here we come to Martinsville. And sure enough, Kansas, who had gotten wrecked, was out of the race, takes out Joey Logano, ruins his playoff race because then in Texas, Logano, bad luck, doesn't finish. At Phoenix, a track that ironically Logano's won this year, but that year he didn't win, and he was out of any hopes, no hopes of the championship. Here we come to Martinsville, the same track Kansas took out Joey Logano. If I was Ben Rhodes, oh my goodness. I mean, this is just something where this race, yeah, when you get in. Oh, and by the way, watch your back bumper. Who's back there could have really ruined your race.
Yeah, Martinsville is definitely the perfect track for payback. You just mentioned the infamous Joey Logano and Matt Kenseth incident where Joey Logano and Matt Kenseth were battling for a spot to go to championship four, and Logano ends up spinning out Kenseth and then Logano's going to race for a championship and Matt Kenseth is not. And then Matt Kenseth got him back, took him out at Martinsville, and certainly short tracks perfect place for payback. And after this incident happened on track between Rose and Eckes, a lot of people on social media were really upset by the fact that Rose wrecked him on a straightaway. At one of the fastest parts of the racetrack at Texas. Do you think NASCAR should penalize him? It should penalize Ben Rose for the incident with Eckes, or should they just let the drivers police themselves?
There's a level of, the drivers police themselves. However, when it's something, especially like at such a fast track, Texas Motor Speedway, on the straightaway, a lot of us probably remember what happened between Carl Edwards and Brad Keselowski at Atlanta that sent Brad Keselowski into the air right near the catch on the main stretch. Had something worse had happened, that would have been a black eye for the sport. NASCAR doesn't want something like that to repeat. Martinsville, that's the perfect track for beating and banging. Much slower speed, the risk of serious injury or worse is greatly reduced. But when you're at Texas Motor Speedway, when you're at any of these mile and a half where you're going much faster and on the straightaway like that, NASCAR, my opinion, should be doing something to ensure that, hey, we don't want this kind of stuff, especially if it could get out of hand. The last thing we want is somebody to get seriously hurt.
Yeah, definitely. We don't want people to get seriously hurt, and at least I think it would be a good idea for NASCAR to meet with Ben Rhodes and just say, Ben, you can't be hooking somebody on a straight like that at a track like Texas, where the speeds are high, because if certain things that fall into place, that could have been very bad for Christian Eckes, and you definitely don't want something like that to happen. And you do mention, yeah, Martinsville, the short track, is a perfect track for beating and banging. So if you want to get even at a track like Martinsville, by all means, go ahead. But just don't admit that you wrecked them on purpose. As Bubba Wallace, it turned into a fine for him. Yeah, and I'm sure on Friday night, all eyes are going to be glued on the TV when the NASCAR Gander RV and Outdoors Truck Series heads to the paperclip in Martinsville, Virginia. And next, I'm going to talk about the Cup race. Yesterday on the Grid Live pre-race show, we said a bad race for Kevin Harvick can really shuffle everything. And early on, while running up front, Kevin Harvick made hard contact with the wall and fell back to 38. Alex Bowman out front leading before the red flag, and the graphics showed how big this was going to impact the playoffs with Kevin Harvick hitting the wall and running back there, and Harvick at one point was only 5 points above the cut line. Then the obvious red flag for rain. What were your thoughts, and how big of a break was this red flag for Kevin Harvick?
My thoughts was, I know yesterday I was talking about how I felt Kevin Harvick is pretty much safe. I remember you said, one bad race for Kevin Harvick, and it could really change everything. Right before the race was called off for the day, they showed the latest playoff graphic. Kevin Harvick was only +2 above the cut line. Denny Hamlin +2. Chase Elliott +1. Everyone else below the cut line. This really could change everything this race. For Kevin Harvick, especially knowing that we're going to race Monday, that just gives you a little bit more time to sit and think about, all the scenarios for tomorrow. I know Rodney Childress, the crew chief, they're probably thinking about, okay, what's going to be our exact plan tomorrow? Once we start going under those yellow flag laps, let's bring the car in. Let's make sure we check all the damage, make sure there's no potential tire rub. I still think they have a lot of opportunity to pick up positions, especially we're only 50 plus laps into this race, a lot of time to try to work your way to the front. And if the other playoff drivers have bad luck, opportunity to get some distance, gain some points, and grow their lead over everybody else.
Yeah, definitely. And I mentioned rain. Actually, rain is going to be in the forecast on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Even Jimmy Johnson tweeted out a photo showing 90%, and 80% chance of rain on those days. It seemed like luck is definitely not playing into NASCAR's favor. Do you think instead of going the scheduled distance of 334 laps, 500 miles, will this be a race to halfway, considering the fact that we have a significant chance of rain these next few days?
It does appear this is going to be a race to halfway, and one of the big things, this is just going to make it where those stage one points are going to be really, really, really important, especially if Kevin Harvick is unable to make up those positions and we have only the stage one points, and then here comes the rain. If we get to stage two, even better. But the big thing is, this allows Kevin Harvick to not lose too many points compared to if we go the full distance, all the points from the stages. And it was a short race, especially if a lot of people are anticipating a race to halfway, we could see a lot of craziness on the restarts. Caution breeds cautious. We saw the big one here in Texas the last time. It could be a really eventful race, and I think NASCAR with this early morning start, their hope is let's just get as much as we can in. If we could get to halfway, great, because the last thing they would want is us to be sitting there Tuesday, Wednesday, trying to get a race in.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to have those teams sitting down there for so many extra days. And I do feel like after checking out the forecast, how it's supposed to be extremely rainy these next few days. I think NASCAR is going to have to just try to do everything they can to get the show in, and even if it's just a race to halfway. Honestly, tonight, if I'm a crew chief and debriefing with my team, I'm saying we're going to strategize this race to halfway, because I do not see this race going the full scheduled distance. You're muted.
A lot of fans that were watching the NASCAR race, they all saw the MotoGP race. One of the biggest things, of course, with MotoGP, it has been one of the most unpredictable seasons we've had. Continuing the theme, we saw the first lap, Brad Binder, who already won a race, Jack Miller, both of them crashed out. Now, Brad had already got one win this year, was hopeful to be in a championship hunt. Those chances took a big slim dive. However, the pole sitter, Nakajima, great start. He was in the lead, but then on turn 4, he goes out with a crash. He had finished in the top 10 in every race except this one. For Nakagami, this was just definitely a big heartbreak. A lot of folks thought he was going to get a win. Now, of course, as I mentioned, this race was on NBC during the NASCAR race red flag period. We talked about the increased exposure of MotoGP for a U.S. audience. What did the opening lap do to help U.S. audience introduce them to MotoGP?
I definitely thought it was a great introduction to MotoGP for anybody here in the United States who's never seen a MotoGP race before, and actually for myself, for the most part, I have to watch. I'm watching like all of the highlights from the race to be able to talk MotoGP with you guys. But I'm actually never seen an entire MotoGP race in its entirety until now. And I'm just be honest, I was absolutely blown away by everything that happened on the opening lap and how close they run throughout the race. It's not like it's not like you see them get completely spread out. They were like running nose to tail all throughout the field, it was just really cool. And especially with all of the drama on the first lap, with the pole sitter going off, and then had a wreck towards the back of the pack. And just seeing those riders gliding through the corners, like sideways close to the ground. It was just really exciting to see that, and it makes me want to put more of an effort to catch those MotoGP races live.
MotoGP, definitely one of the more entertaining races out there, and it seems to be always every week. One of the big things, of course, this year has been just one of the most unpredictable years for MotoGP ever. We right now have 3 races remaining in the MotoGP season, and the point leader is Joan Mir. He has a 14-point lead over Fabio Quartararo, and there's 32 points between first place and fifth place. So it's still really close because very similar to Formula One, winner takes 25 points. In MotoGP, though, the top 15 scores points, top 15 finishers. Overall, the top 6 are still mathematically eligible for the championship. How odd is it to say that with 3 races to go, we have 6 riders with a shot at the championship, and the point leader still has not won a race yet this season?
Oh, it's very odd. Honestly, heading into this MotoGP season, I thought it was going to be the Mark Marquez show, and it would be nobody else but Mark Marquez still in the show. But then the injury happened, and the championship battle was wide open. It's really crazy to see this many riders still mathematically eligible for the championship, especially that the points, considering the great parity we've seen this season, all the different winners, that the guy who's leading the point standings hasn't even won a race this season. I don't even know if we've ever seen a winless MotoGP champion, and if we do end up seeing a winless champion, I wonder how the fan base would react to that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. How would the fan base react to that? It's just really something else to think. Mir, he was not one of the drivers that I would consider a favorite to win the championship, but he's leading the points. He hasn't won a race, and in fact, he hasn't won a MotoGP race since entering MotoGP. Suzuki, I don't think a lot of people anticipate Suzuki to be this front. We, of course, knew they were improving every year, but we still anticipate Honda and, of course, Yamaha. Now, Nakagami, 7th in the points, 45 points behind. He's really in a must win situation to try to keep any title hopes alive. The max of points available ahead is 75 points in total since we have 3 races. Big thing, of course, seeing him go out, that first lap crash, that had to be a heartbreak not only for him, but for Honda. Honda, of course, no wins yet in MotoGP. They were looking really good with Nakagami, and then later on, Marquez went out. How heartbreaking, especially for Nakagami. looking for his first win. Best race for a Honda. How does he respond to such a disappointing weekend that he experienced?
Oh, it is absolutely heartbreaking for Nakagami here. When in the pole, imagine all the excitement in Honda, thinking of the possibilities of Japanese manufacturer and Japanese rider winning in MotoGP. That would have been an incredible storyline, and there would have been a lot of celebrations back in Japan because they are very passionate about motorsports all over the world over there, no matter where it's taking place. We saw when Takuma Sato won his two Indy 500s. Fan base in Japan and Honda went absolutely they were so ecstatic and happy. And if Nakagami was able to win the race today, I'm sure it would have been a massive celebration. And I think the best way to respond to this disappointment is just put it behind you, see what went wrong, and just regroup for the next race.
Regroup for the next race. I mean, he had a lot, essentially all top 10 finishes season long. This had to be a big disappointment, of course. I know during the warm up lap, the two commentators were talking about the last time a Japanese rider won was 2012. Definitely might have been something where the pressure got there. But at the end, I would agree with you. Just put it all behind, focus on going out there and trying to go for the win the next one. Now, of course, the winner was Franco Morbidelli, which Jessica from the Paddock Inside had correctly predicted on Pick a Winner. Alex Rint in the Suzuki took second place, and the points leader, Mir, started 12th, came all the way to the podium, third place. This includes getting around Quartararo, Vinales, and Dovizioso, some of his main title contenders. 3 races left. The Suzuki team is looking pretty good. Mir has been consistent all season long, and he has shown the speed that he can win. How does he approach the last 3 races? Does he stay the course just putting together good finishes? Or should he try a little bit more and try to get his first career MotoGP win?
I think it's definitely situational here. If you're in a perfect situation to score points and maintain a comfortable lead heading into these final races of the season, I think that Mir just needs to just focus on getting those consistent finishes and try to stay out of trouble and not finish way down the running order. But definitely if he's in position to go for the win, I definitely think that he should take it. But also if it's going to put him in a tough like if there's a situation on track where it's going to be really risky, trying to go for the win, he might just have to think big picture and back off. And to be honest, to be honest, in this situation, this late in the year, I would rather finish second than crash going for the win.
Definitely bigger picture. Yes, getting that first MotoGP win will mean so much. That's what all these riders try to do, go out there and win. You're the championship leader with 3 races to go. Definitely the big picture. And here's the advantage he has as well too. The top 15 finishers all score points in every race. So if you're in the top 10, you're sitting pretty. If you're ahead of Quartararo, Dovizioso, Vinales, you're just padding your lead. If there was a couple laps to go and you're in second place, take that safe route. Try to go for a win, especially if the leader makes a mistake, but don't try to push it to where you could go out and lose all those positions on the last lap. It's going to be really interesting to see how he handles everything this for the remainder of the year. Now, of course, in the grid ranking, with all the inconsistencies and different winners in MotoGP, there's no driver in the top 10. We don't see any clear favorite week after week in MotoGP. Compared to the past 2 seasons, Marc Marquez won the grid ranking world championship twice in a row. It's not often we see a series like Formula One, MotoGP, or World Rally Championship have so many different winners each season. Will 2020 stand out for the on-track competition and not be overshadowed by the pandemic and the effect it's had on MotoGP?
I definitely think that 2020 will definitely stand out for so many reasons. It's certainly been one unusual year that we'll never forget. And especially to mention Mark Marquez winning the grid ranking world championship the past 2 years, him being out, it's certainly opened up a lot of things in MotoGP, and I do wonder if Mark Marquez had never gotten hurt, would he be a 3-time grid ranking world champion?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the biggest questions I think a lot of folks will be asking is had he not gotten injured, how would the MotoGP season look? Assumingly, he would have a couple wins, possibly the points lead right now. It's just one of those things, especially we don't see Formula One. We usually know it's going to be Mercedes, Red Bull, and Ferrari traditionally up front. MotoGP, the Yamaha, Honda teams, we expect them up front. This year has just been so all over the place for MotoGP that while they were the one series that didn't start their season on time because of the pandemic, since the pandemic, it has been a very eventful season for the on-track action. And I think that's just something where, especially for 2020, as all the series going to look back and see how they responded to the pandemic. For MotoGP, they can look back and see, okay, this is how we responded to the pandemic, but we had some of the great racing, a lot of action, and it really reflects, especially unfortunately in the grid ranking where they're lower, but a lot of action from MotoGP this year.
Yeah, definitely a lot of action in MotoGP and all across the motorsports world. In the 2020 grid ranking, on the surface, saw little changes, but the big development looks like only two drivers remain in the hunt for the grid ranking world championship. Lewis Hamilton won from pole, still within Scott McLaughlin. Kevin Harvick is in a must-win situation, sitting at 36 at the moment and one lap down. So right now it doesn't look like Kevin Harvick's going to be able to win those 3 races in a row like we discussed yesterday on Grid Live pre-race. And for all the new viewers out there, does Scott McLaughlin's race at St. Pete affect his grid ranking score?
No, it does not. With the grid ranking, it is series based. So since Scott McLaughlin is based with the Australian Supercar seasons this year, that's where he has scored. The Grid World Motorsport League, which you can follow at grid_WML on Twitter, they count every race a driver does. So not only does it count Scott McLaughlin's race in the IndyCar race, earlier this year it counted Scott Dixon's race in sports car racing, like the 24 Hours Le Mans. Is one of the big differences between the Grid World Motorsport League and the grid ranking. So definitely, considering Scott McLaughlin had a pretty rough go at St. Petersburg this weekend, it doesn't count against him in the grid ranking.
And the unpredictable MotoGP season has Mir 15th, the highest ranked MotoGP rider, and compared to last season, Marc Marquez was leading and went on to win the grid ranking. Can Mir or any other MotoGP rider get in the top 10 of the grid ranking?
It really doesn't appear so, especially Mir right now, 15th. If he was to get a couple wins and the drivers up front that are still racing, particularly Royal Rally Championship, NASCAR, maybe even Formula One, if Verstappen and Bottas were just to have absolute bad luck, he may have a shot again in the top 10. But it really doesn't look like it. I mean, the big thing, of course, MotoGP, they only have 3 races left. Formula One, they still have 5 races left. So I think there's too few races for any MotoGP rider to get into the grid ranking top 10.
And IndyCar ends with two racers in the top 10 currently, Scott Dixon and Josef Newgarden, the top two in the championship this year. Of course, we'll soon have only F1, MotoGP, and WRC left running. How is this year's grid ranking shaping up in comparison to the past 3 seasons?
It's definitely shaping up much more differently than the other seasons in the past. 2017, the first season, came down to the final race for the NASCAR Cup Series at Homestead. Truex outscored Marc Marquez that day. Grid ranking still had a few weeks left, mainly because of Formula One, but it was already the Formula One driver were out of it. Martin Truex won the championship. 2018, Kyle Busch came up one position short to win the grid ranking world championship, so that allowed Marc Marquez to get the championship by 0.01, closest finish in the grid ranking history. Then last year, at the season finale for the Australian Supercar Series in Newcastle, Scott McLaughlin came up 2 spots short. Marc Marquez won the championship. This year, it looks like it could be decided, especially if Kevin Harvick does not get a win at Texas. it could be decided just about any Formula One race remaining. Big thing, Lewis Hamilton wins. If he was to win the remaining races, that could easily get him the grid ranking world championship. If he doesn't win, if he finishes second place and had started third or worse and moved up to second place, he does still have a shot at the championship. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I mean, it could come down to the last race of the year at Abu Dhabi, or it could even be decided next week, next race weekend at Imola.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's been really cool watching the grid rankings shape up. I remember when I first joined Grid Network, it took me a little while to understand the grid ranking, but as time went on, slowly began to pick it up and truly understand how cool of a concept that you've come up with, Joe, and heading into 2021. Hopefully we'll get more fans on board, and they'll closely be watching the grid ranking. Already have some fans who really like it, especially Avery Hage on Twitter. I remember he gave us a shout out about the grid ranking. I remember that was a there was a crazy little debate on Twitter about ranking the best drivers across the world, and and after looking at all these other sites that rank that rank drivers, he chose ours over everyone else, which was really cool and just shows that Grid Network is going to continue to grow well into the future.
Definitely continue to grow well into the future, and definitely we encourage everyone to be sure to visit gridranking.com. There you can find all our social media page as well as our Twitter pages where we're very active, including the Grid Ranking and World Motorsport League page. Now, of course, IndyCar, their season came to an end today. 2020 season is now over. Scott Dixon is your champion. 2021, trying to go for a seventh championship, but it's not going to be an easy road. And Randy Osworth, they're going to come back. They want to get more wins, rebound after this year, go for a championship. McLaren, really good season, especially in Pato O'Ward, was up there with Josef Newgarden, contending for the win today. They're going to be looking for wins and championships. And of course, Team Penske, they're going to be looking at coming back. And don't count out Rahal Letterman Racing. They're looking really fast. Graham Rahal got struck with bad luck when the yellow flag came out right before his pit stop. Of course, Scott McLaughlin, who is likely going to win the grid ranking world championship, is with Penske all next year. And Jimmy Johnson driving the 48 with Chip Ganassi Racing. And we may potentially have a Formula One driver coming in IndyCar. Kobe, who is most likely to be the early?
Well, to be honest with you, Joe, I can't really pick one driver. In my head, I've been thinking of two drivers in particular, so I'm just going to give you both of them. And first driver finished behind Scott Dixon and Joseph Newgarden in the championship is Colton Herta. I think this year Colton Herta took a big step in his IndyCar career, and I think next season Colton Herta could definitely be up there contending for more wins and definitely be a major championship threat. And one driver who I think is going to is he had an incredible season this year, and I think that he has nothing but great things ahead. Is Pato O'Ward? I think Pato O'Ward definitely has the personality, the charisma, and the talent behind the wheel to potentially be one of IndyCar's next superstars.
I definitely have to agree about Pato O'Ward. If that team continues to improve and he gets that first win, he could really break through and start getting more wins week after week. One of the big things, of course, for IndyCar this year has been a challenge, just like everyone else in motorsports. Considering all the changes that we saw this year, still IndyCar kept planning for 2021. One of the big plans, of course, Nashville. They're going to have a brand new race, the Music City Grand Prix in downtown Nashville. Assuming a more normal season with stops at Barber Motorsport, Detroit, Laguna Seca, and Portland, will 2021 be the big season that we are anticipating the 2020 season to be, with Roger Penske being in charge of IndyCar?
I mean, we can certainly hope for a more normal season with some of the tracks we didn't see this year. Like the ones you mentioned, Laguna Seca, your home race over there in Portland, the doubleheader on the streets of Belle Isle, and then Barber Motorsport Park. I'm sure a lot of people and also Toronto, the street course. I think the fans will be really excited to see some of those tracks return, especially since because of pandemic we couldn't have them this year. But I do think there's still going to be some disappointment about the 2021 schedule because there's no Iowa Speedway and there's there's not a lot of oval tracks on the schedule. I think the race I think yeah yeah not the addition of Nashville has a lot of people excited especially after seeing the layout. But I do think that the one thing missing from the schedule is another oval or two.
Yeah, another oval will be great. The season is looking exciting. There's definitely those fans out there that wish we had more ovals as well. Big thing, of course, I think with the drivers that we got coming into IndyCar next year, that got a lot of people buzzing. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun. Now, of course, this year very unprecedented with the pandemic, and now IndyCar their season has come to a close. So one of the big things, did you feel IndyCar deliver a good season for the fans, especially since they had so many double headers this year and really just pulling out different stops to try to give a good season for everyone?
Yes, I do. I think IndyCar put the better to get the best schedule possible, considering all the circumstances surrounding the global pandemic. I mean, it definitely hasn't been an ideal season. Had a lot of double headers, was something not used to on the IndyCar schedule, but considering everything that happened, I do think that Roger Penske did the best that he could, and even showed how committed he is to having the Indy 500. Had to move it out of the month of May and even ran it behind closed doors in August. And I'm sure this is something that we'll never forget for a long time. And assuming that things don't change between now and next May, it'll be really great to see the Indianapolis 500 to return to its traditional slot. But all in all, I'm just blessed that we got to see an IndyCar season because at one point I didn't know if we were going to see any racing this year. So I think that this year we just need to be thankful that an IndyCar season happened, and we're going to be heading into 2021 with the hopes of having a, a season without many interruptions. Although you're probably going to see some of the same things like we're seeing now, like with masks and social distancing and probably limited crowds.
Yeah, overall, I feel Roger Penske, the group at IndyCar, delivered a really good season considering all the challenges they've had. Yes, the Indianapolis 500 was in August behind closed doors, but still, it's the Indianapolis 500. I think it was a good decision to run the race, not just cancel the race. When it came to the double headers, yeah, it's a little bit different. So many double headers, but you know what? We got a lot of good racing the entire season, and we had a great championship battle at Petersburg between Josef Newgarden and Scott Dixon. Definitely wanted to say great job to everyone at IndyCar for the season that they put together, considering all the circumstances.
Yeah, definitely. Everyone deserves a pat on the back in IndyCar management, especially the man at the top, Roger Penske. Without Roger Penske's leadership, I fear that the IndyCar series would have been in a lot of trouble. But Roger Penske took over. He took control of the series, and he made sure that the series was able to survive during this tough time. And because of Roger Penske, IndyCar series will live on to see another year. We got to see the Indianapolis 500 when at times we thought it was going to get canceled, and ended up putting together a full season. Yeah, yeah, in special circumstances, but we've made it to the finish line, and IndyCar can have a nice lie down during the off season, and then when the springtime rolls around, get ready to come back for the season opener on the streets of St. Pete. And before we go off the air for the night, what's something to remember from this racing weekend?
Definitely, I think something to remember from this racing weekend has to be some of the races that we weren't originally planning to see. The Portugal Grand Prix, that was not part of the calendar. Now everyone's talking about maybe we should have Portugal, other tracks on the calendar at least every couple of years, compared to some of the tracks where we don't see a whole lot of action traditionally. When it comes to MotoGP, they were at the Aragon circuit for the second weekend in a row. That was a very eventful race. That is something I think a lot of people are going to remember, particularly the first lap with Nakagami. Will he rebound from that? I think a lot of people are going to be asking that question going forward. And then IndyCar, that was just one of the most bizarre IndyCar races I can recall in a long time. I think the first year they had the Houston Grand Prix when it was kart. That's the only other race I can remember that was more chaotic with rain, while Montoya and Dario Franchitti crashing out. That was a crazy race as well. So definitely, I think those are going to be some of the moments everyone's going to remember for this weekend, and hopefully, we'll have some memories from the Monday NASCAR race.
Yeah, definitely, Joe. You listed a whole bunch of things from this racing weekend, but I'm just gonna go small and pick one thing that I thought was really important. How about Sebastian Bourdais scoring a top five in AJ Foyt race's number 14 car? That I think that was certainly one of the bigger surprises of the racing weekend because as we know, AJ Foyt Racing has been running towards the back of the field for a long time now, and for Sebastian Bourdais to be able to maximize that car and take it to an impressive top five result. I think he's just showing team principal Larry Foyt that they made the right decision to hire Sebastian Bourdais to drive that 14 car full time next season. And Sebastian Bourdais just reminded us how good of a race car driver he is. And I really do think that with Sebastian Bourdais behind the wheel of AJ Foyt Racing's iconic number 14, I do think that Bourdais can take that team to a whole new level. And we also want to remind you all to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Grid Network, and want to give a special thank you to all of our wonderful subscribers. We recently reached over 100. Great milestone for us, and we definitely really appreciate your support. And be sure to visit the Patreon link in the video description and the schedule coming up for this week. Wednesday night, Grid Tonight, talk about all of the news in the motorsports world. Then Thursday afternoon, another episode of Grid Girls, all the women in motorsports. And on Friday, the monthly episode Life on the Grid featuring staff writer from Kicking the Tires, Seth Eggert. And then on Saturday we're gonna have the Grid Live pre-race show previewing all of the weekend's racing action for Joe Samniego. I'm Kobe Lambert from the PodiumFitness.net. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful night.